Why are NPC memes so effective? We'll go over the psychology and symbolism behind them and how they relate to our lives today.
So NPCs, what they stand for is non-playable characters, and it comes from video games. Specifically, in a video game, you, the human player, might have to interact with non-human components in the video game. And to do so, the non-human components, the non-playable characters, would just run on a script. They would run on rails. The responses were already predetermined and pre-programmed. So I think this is where the start of it comes into making the NPC memes so effective in real life, because it strikes at a key aspect of normal human functioning that these people lack, which is pattern recognition. In other words, what I'm trying to argue is that these people have an intentional exploit that's being taken advantage of, or they are intentionally exploiting their own ability to recognize patterns. And this creates a failure, which creates this pre-programmed response. This creates the non-playable character meme that you see in reality. Aristotle argued that in order to gain access, or in order to gain knowledge of the world, we had to go through our senses, because we're not born with knowledge. And so we formulate basic principles and the science of our reality and of ourselves by deriving knowledge from our sense perceptions. In other words, you can make the argument that one's wit is essentially one's ability, or the speed at which one can generalize the universal from the limited selection of experiences that we go through. And to put this into practice, Aristotle then talks about an example of an army, and an army that's been routed. But as the army is routed and then flees from whatever they're fleeing, one soldier will then stand up. And when this one soldier stands up and then pauses, and then can see the truth for what it is, and realize that there's no reason to be scared, or realize that perhaps there's a slightly better way or more accurate way of looking at the situation, they change, they flip. This might cause two other soldiers to see what's going on, at least to pause, and then come to the same conclusion, which in turn might cause others, and so on and so forth. You have a process where the mind can see and at least strive to try to find the universal. Thus, the formation concludes by making a rational, logical set of conclusions. This, in a sense, is using the moral compass that we have. The moral compass is our ability to discern the abstract universal truth from a given set of experiences, to generalize and to discriminate, if you will. The starting point of knowledge is noticing patterns and differences, and then developing pattern recognition, abstraction of the universal from the limited. But the NPC has lost the capacity to logically discriminate, either willfully or from a life of training. This is the intentional handicapping of the moral compass. And it is to accept indiscrimination as a universal moral imperative. Thus, the NPCs lack effective pattern recognition abilities through their own intentional self-censoring. And we've been warned about this before. You can look to the ancients, or you can look to the moderns, or you can even look to video games. But the warning remains the same, from Plato's Cave to MGS2. It's all there, all said in its own way, and all with the same warning. Alan Bloom, in Closing of the American Mind, argues we've made universal indiscrimination a virtue. In other words, we've decided it's virtuous to impair our fundamental ability to engage in pattern recognition. The problem is that seeing patterns and generalizing these patterns now has all sorts of labels ending in phobias and isms. For example, having a discriminating mind used to be a good thing. Being called a discriminating shopper was a compliment. Accurate pattern recognition allows us to select for optimal outcomes. The process of discrimination is so fundamental to us as humans it can't arbitrarily be switched off. This is how we discard bad outcomes and optimize for good outcomes. Thus, the pursuit of truth is the abstraction of the universal from the limited, and it fundamentally requires all of us to ask, is this true? That's the moral compass in action right there. But if we lack the courage to do this, or fall prey to the consensus monster, the demand then will be, will others be okay with me thinking this is true? This is problematic because it implies that the only way to be virtuous is to kill the part of your brain that wants to discriminate. Thus, a full shutdown of your brain's difference engine, the discrimination engine, is required to avoid unacceptable conclusions. Those who fail to enforce this or self-enforce this are quickly targeted by the various organs of what I call the consensus monster. Mainstream media, alternative media, social media, it's all the same thing, designed to manufacture and echo a digital narrative. And punish those who fail to adopt the false premises. The consensus monster in action. So, to go back to our soldier analogy from earlier, if the army is routed and then they start to retreat, if one soldier were to turn around and say, wait a minute, what's really going on is not what we believe is really going on. This is that one soldier asking, is this true? But this is where the consensus monster comes back in. Because if it's, is this true, versus will others be okay with me thinking this is true, the individual will side with, no, I'm not going to think this is true because others won't be okay with me thinking this is true. And therefore, a logical conclusion is not reached. Or you could say the adoption of a lie is upheld versus the acceptance of truth. The other thing from this is that our brain doesn't like to be left in this eternal state of logical limbo. It wants to order the world around itself. It wants to put things into boxes and label them. But it is being specifically trained not to do this, leading to a great deal of comfort. Thus, it leaves the brain craving a solution for which to judge the world with. And the solution is a structure that is provided to NPCs. They are programmed by authority figures and media with the fundamental logic that they use to view the world. And this is very dangerous to our democracy. Their many contradictory positions are because their viewpoints are contrived, not derived. It is also why the positions can seemingly change multiple times in a week. Scott Adams calls us out when he says that we are assigned our opinion. But the NPC brain only sees and extracts up to the limit it is allowed to by the filters it has been given. Thus, only the partial universal is extracted, so the conclusions they reach, or the conclusions the mind reach, are fundamentally flawed. It leaves the NPC incapable of learning or reaching logical conclusions. They can't grasp the basic fundamental truths of the world around them, so any reasoning done by them will be flawed. And thus, our opinions remain assigned to us, meaning our viewpoint is contrived and not derived. This kind of person cannot learn. They are demoralized. If you can't learn from your experiences, you will never accurately identify threats. This was called out by Yuri Bezmenov in the mid-80s. He says that their brains are so devastated and trained that they won't even see the truth, even if it's right in front of their eyes, until they are in harm's way. And this is why the NPC meme is so fitting. The lack of quality that lies at the foundation of the human experience. It's why they seem so devoid of a soul. It's why they all run the same program in a sense. The NPCs accepted the fiction they've been provided, meaning that the personas, experiences, triumphs, and defeats are nothing but a byproduct of a system whose real objective is being able to generate and manipulate emotions for one end, and that is control. So then the question comes up, how do you change these poor creatures from NPCs back into people? That is a hard question. But returning to Aristotle and going back to the army analogy he gave us, the way to start undoing the damage is to convince the NPC army, or the army in the NPC's head, not to shoot that one soldier that dares to turn around and ask a question, or at least question the reality that they so have believed that might be true. And it only takes one. The reason it only takes one is because as soon as that soldier, in a sense, is allowed to live, as soon as fundamental reality is no longer an enemy, the process of restructuring reality to how it is versus how it is contrived and forced onto the individual begins. It may take time and it may be slow, but that is the first step. By its sheer existence, that single soldier will draw others, and in doing so, will continue to highlight the bugs in the operating system and call out the flaws. Thus, the brain will begin to take over and hopefully start the self-repair process. And that is why the NPC meme is so effective. You can never unsee the truth once you've seen it.
Yeah, and let's try and tie this back into what's actually happening. So, how are these NPCs? Why are they so effective? And what does it mean under the surface? People today, they are bound to their identity. And nowadays, people's identity are external factors such as religion, race, political views, or any of the such. So if those views, if the group that those views are in, if they start to change, you are forced to change with them because your identity is tied to such group. So let's take this to an extreme. Let's say you are tied to a political view and that political narrative starts to change and it starts to change fast. For your identity to stay intact and you to stay within the group, you have to change with it. And when we have all of these millions and millions of people being forced to see the same message and their identity tells them, okay, we are part of the group, therefore we are going to watch this message, take it in, and we are going to accept it. You can accept things that are brutally ethically wrong, and you would say that they're ethically wrong if it wasn't the group that was forcing you to think like this. And
The consensus monster.
and not only that, you are going to rationalize it to tell yourself that you are thinking about this logically. You're going to say, I am being Justin. He's the news reporter and he's saying information. You are going to take that information at face value and you are going to accept that as your own critical thought without doing any due diligence of your own. And we are seeing this on a mass scale. And as Justin said, the only way to reverse that is to start to think for yourself. And once you do start to think for yourself, it is irreversible because you can never go back. Once you start to see the fraud that most of these mainstream medias are portraying, it is almost laughable that anybody could fall for it.
Yeah, and it's fine to start small. It's fine to start small because all you need is one thing to flip. And once that one thing flips, another one will flip, and then another two, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, let's go back to that example of the soldiers. All it takes is, let's say there's one person dancing in the crowd. If all it takes is one more person for two people to start dancing in a crowd, and the whole crowd will start dancing. Of course, there'll be a few people that stay out of it. They'll stay in the corner and they don't want to dance because they'll never dance no matter what. But the majority of people will continue to follow the crowd. And for better or worse, if they follow the crowd into their own critical thinking, that definitely could be a plus. But this is happening in all spaces. Do not think this is a one-leaning political view. It is everywhere. And I'm sure we all fall victim to this. The point is that you don't know that you are falling victim to it. You don't know where you are seeing the consensus monster and you're following it blindly and calling it rational thought. I'm sure me and Justin both do this in ways that we just cannot yet see because we do not know where we're doing it. That's the point behind it. You don't know where you are following this consensus monster.
Yeah, or to echo Scott Adams, the reason that our opinions can be assigned to us is because we do not think our opinions can be assigned to us.
Yeah, that's where humility comes into it. You just have to take everything at such a basic level and just work your way up because you don't know everything and you have to accept that fact. And these things are wildly effective and people try to take them off the internet for years. It is one of the most effective and long-living historically funny memes that goes much deeper than just a meme.
And lastly, Josh, in closing, I want to say that this is not really me. This came from Screen Crab from another website. And my goal here with you is just basically to bring it to people's attention because I don't think many people have seen the Screen Grab, but I think that the concepts and what it calls out are important. So hopefully, that can be, useful to someone. But again, I want to be really, really clear. I was not by nowhere means clever enough to think this up, but I was clever enough to say, wait a minute, there's something here. And I think it's something that needs to be seen by more people than just us.
Yes. So let's continue to fight these consensus monsters and win the battle. All right, my friends, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.